Sunday, August 25th. As I do every year, I'm spending the better part of the month of August and the first week of September at a cottage north of Toronto, situated on one of the thousands of spectacular freshwater lakes in Canada. For 2 months of the year, there is no more spectacular place to be, in my opinion, than exactly where I am. It's quiet, beautiful, fresh air, fresh water, non-stop water sports. I've done my best to deliver a podcast free of background noise, but you may catch a far-off hum of a motorboat or jet ski. Enjoy it. Me, I love it all. The power noise toys and the chill, non-motorized stuff. I'm actually a hardcore supper and open water swimmer. And if you have not experienced a Canadian cottage summer, add it to your bucket list. You will not be disappointed. Predictably and sadly, the carnage and violence in Israel and the region continues, unabated. As much as I needed a break from the constant strain, I cannot truly disconnect and unplug this year. I still watch Israeli news somewhat compulsively and television and follow events very closely. Everything is just too critical. Our regular Sunday commentator, Yaakov Katz, is out of pocket for a few days, and so another State of Tel Aviv regular, Lieutenant Colonel in reserves, and former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus joins us today to discuss the dramatic Israeli Air Force attack on Hezbollah rocket launchers in Lebanon last night. They were apparently hours away from slamming Israel with more than 3,000 attack drones and rockets. Yes, you heard that correctly. More than 3,000. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and now tucked away in the Algonquin Highlands north of Toronto, Canada, but always coming to you with a State of Tel Aviv state of mind. Stay with us. And a good Sunday morning to you, Jonathan Conricus. How are you today?
Relatively speaking, I'm doing okay. Thank you. How are you?
Relatively speaking, I'm doing very well. Thank you. I am on an unidentified lake north of Toronto, fresh water, sunny, beautiful. And it's exactly what I needed to decompress from the last year where we both live. Having said that, we never disconnect. I want to, of course, get right into the very dramatic news that we heard when we all woke up this morning about the preemptive Israeli attack on Hezbollah positions in Lebanon. Tell us what you know about what happened and why.
Yeah, it's funny that the name of your podcast is State of Tel Aviv, because that's very much a topic now in Israel for Israelis. And I say this as if it's a joking matter, but for Israelis living in northern Israel, it is no joking matter. And there's a lot of resentment and frustration and anger and many other negative feelings bubbling in northern Israel, because Israel, for the first time in a long, long while, actually took action and dealt Hezbollah quite a significant blow by taking the initiative. Why did Israel do? Because Hezbollah was about to launch a very significant attack against Israel. Hundreds of rockets and drones were supposed to have been fired at Israel, north and sensitive targets in central Israel, i.e. Tel Aviv. And for a few hours, the story in Israel was that the IDF responded, or the IDF took action because Hezbollah was getting ready to fire towards Tel Aviv, to which Israelis in northern Israel responded. So this is Operation Saving Tel Aviv. And of course, the understatement here being that for about 10 and a half months, Hezbollah has been firing at northern Israel without any very significant Israeli response, despite the fact that Israelis have been pushed out of their homes and so many have been killed, and northern Israel is very difficult to live in, if not to say impossible. So that, connecting with the name of your show, of the podcast, yeah, the state of Tel Aviv is one state, and then there's the rest of Israel. And there's an additional layer of tension.
To be painfully clear, the state of Tel Aviv has, in the past, been used in a good-natured but sardonic way, the expression that is. For many Israelis who do not live in the center of the universe, Tel Aviv, to invoke the fact that it is the center of the universe. Just as every country has a city or two that dominates the national agenda, so does Israel. The state of Tel Aviv has also been used to suggest that Tel Aviv is an anomalous, liberal kind of place, where anything goes, like a separate country almost, and that it does not really reflect the reality in the rest of Israel. Also truth to that. Gay clubs, smoke and dope, or weed, as the kids call it these days, culture, business, fashion, all of these pursuits tend to be concentrated in Tel Aviv. So the state of Tel Aviv was, for the most part, a good-natured shorthand in the past to communicate a number of thoughts. But the way in which it is being used in the north today, as Conricus says, is not complimentary or good-natured. It is that no one cared about the Hezbollah attacks for over 10 months until Tel Aviv and the center of the country were threatened. And they are right about that, and more than justified in their anger.
Now, to speak about exactly what happened, I'm sure that by now the people who will be our listeners will probably be up to speed, but the analysis of it is quite spectacular military achievement by the IDF. Not the first and last time that we applaud the IDF or other security agencies for achieving very remarkable achievements. This time it was based on a lot of real-time intelligence, basically listening to and watching and monitoring the different launch sites and the command and control system of Hezbollah. And once they were getting ready to fire a significant barrage of rockets and drones towards Israel, before they were able to do so, the IDF had about 100 fighter jets up in the air, and they attacked the launch sites and the launchers themselves, and it made it almost impossible for Hezbollah to fire anything of very big substance. They did get about 300 rockets off. Sadly, there are casualties in Israel. It's now been made official that there's a soldier from the Navy who was killed by a direct attack on a vessel. And there's a lot of damages to houses, civilian houses in Israel. But there's a very big gap between what Hezbollah intended to do and what they eventually were able to do. Hezbollah are now, media-wise, trying to belittle the Israeli achievement and to boost their own achievement. That's a hard lift, even for very talented spinsters like Hassan Nasrallah and propagandists. That's a difficult thing to do because they only have very little to show for their achievements. And to put this into context, Hezbollah has been planning to do this for a long time. This is the so-called Hezbollah revenge for the fact that Israel eliminated the chief of staff of Hezbollah, Fuad Shukr, who was eliminated a few weeks ago in his headquarters in Beirut, in Lebanon. And it took Hezbollah a lot of time to prepare. And then when they launched their attack, it did not succeed, and it fell far short of where we wanted. Approximately an hour ago, Hassan Nasrallah made an address and a statement. He basically tried to explain to Arabs and Lebanese and to the Iranians that Hezbollah's attack had been successful, which, apart from the fact that it's full of shit and really just a blatant lie, it's rather good news because that means that he is trying to de-escalate the situation and isn't trying to go at it again. And I guess that some could see that as a positive thing. So to summarize, we are not in a new phase of the war. We have not seen a change of Israeli strategy. We have not seen Israel diverting the most significant resources and attention from the south to the north. What we have seen is close coordination between Israel and the US in the hours running up to the event. and then an Israeli preemptive defensive attack, and a few hours of, let's say, heightened alert in Israel as a result of the fact that Hezbollah fired lots of rockets, and of course that Israel preempted most of them. So a tense day in Israel, but not a strategic shift. We're still dancing to the Iranian tune.
So 300 missiles did get through. 300 Hezbollah missiles did get through. What was the total number that they aspired to aim at Israel and hit Israel with?
Yeah, so I've heard different estimates, and just not to be nitpicking, but we're talking about rockets and drones. So not missiles, but rockets and drones, and they fired 300. I've heard reports of a few Israeli houses that have been damaged, and there have been hits in a few IDF bases in northern Israel, places that sadly already have been hit before, so nothing new there. And the long-range attacks that Hezbollah planned to do against important strategic targets in central Israel, this they tried to do with drones. That was thwarted, and there was no alarms, no sirens, and most importantly, no impact in central Israel in any strategic Israeli facility. So I think that the plans were about 10 times the amount. And what made that difficult or impossible for Hezbollah to execute was the fact that the launch pads and the launchers, the locations from where rockets were supposed to have been launched, were attacked by the IDF before they could fire their rockets.
Let me ask you this, and I always appreciate your nitpicking. That's what we love you for, the quality of analysis and the attention to detail. We know that Hezbollah has many missiles and
Rockets.
that they could have just rockets. They don't have missiles.
They have missiles as well. The estimate is between 150,000 and perhaps close to 200,000 rockets. Rockets being the inferior version, right? A missile is something that's usually guided, has GPS, and it has a very high level of accuracy, versus a rocket, which is aimed only once and then fired. And if you're lucky, it hits. If you're not so lucky, it doesn't hit. That's the main distinction between a rocket and a missile.
And that's consistent with my limited knowledge of weapons and armaments. And so the question I would ask you is, do we have any idea as to how many missiles Hezbollah may have? And why would they not shoot at least a few missiles at Israel?
Yeah, so they have, the Israeli assessments are a high number of hundreds, maybe a few thousands of precision-guided missiles. I think we should think of these as the doomsday option. Okay, this is the most lethal and damaging weapon that Hezbollah possesses in its arsenal. Of course, provided by Iran through Iraq and Syria, most of it assembled in secret locations in Lebanon. There's still a question mark about their accuracy and how actually good they will be in real life, because I don't know how much Hezbollah has been able to test them, but I think we should assume that they are fit for combat and that they would perform as planned. They have these missiles, but to answer your question, I think that this is more a matter of economy of efforts and not pulling out your biggest and most lethal weapon too soon before there's a real need for it and before the whole, let's say, the balance of escalation has reached the situation where it is warranted. Just as a comparison, for Hezbollah to bring out their precision-guided missiles and fire them at Tel Aviv or Dimona or Ben Gurion or the Ashdod port or the Haifa port, that's about as bad as Hezbollah can go. And what that will do is, of course, invite the mirror image of that in Lebanon, meaning taking out, for instance, power plants, or taking out bridges, or taking out the Beirut port, airport or naval port, and other dual-use semi-civilian, semi-military targets. And if Hezbollah does that, then they're really inviting a very powerful response. I think those are the two reasons. One, because it's very powerful and they don't have many. Two, because it would be a very escalatory thing for Hezbollah to do against Israel, and it would invite a very severe response.
So what were their primary targets, as far as we know? What were their targets in their Chinese attack today? Do we know?
Yeah, so they claim that they fired at military bases and that they fired at an important strategic asset in central Israel. Judging by where the rockets actually hit, the reports I've seen, and they are very credible, and I've seen visual footage live with civilians and everything, the impacts are in civilian villages in northern Israel. So they may have had different plans, but what eventually happened was that they hit, as they have done before, civilian villages. I'm sure that they had plans to hit important targets, Tel Aviv and perhaps intel-related facilities in central Israel, but that was thwarted.
I've read a few things that I believe there's one particular facility at the Glilot Junction that they were aiming for.
Yes, I've heard that as well. It makes sense for them to go after that facility, both from a propaganda point of view and from an operational and tactical point of view. That makes sense, but I don't think we'll ever know because nothing really happened. They didn't really get there.
Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. To continue listening, please go to sign up for a paid subscription, which will entitle you to access all State of Tel Aviv content and archived material, as well as comment forums and exclusive events for subscribers only. We value your patronage and hope that you decide to support us so that we may continue to provide quality content that you have come to expect from us. Think of it as the equivalent of a cup of coffee each month, because that's the cost. To stay informed by an independent media outlet that brings the information and analysis to you straight up. Please go to stateoftelaviv.com to subscribe and continue listening. Thanks in the meantime for being here.